Good evening.
Good evening.
So should we start?
Yeah, we can actually wanted to tell you that because of some unexpected meetings with the PMO that has come up for tomorrow morning. So once I present my speech, and if you have a few questions, I may not be, if it is possible for me to leave by, let's say, 5:45 or so, I would greatly appreciate it, if it is possible.
Sir, we'll do it, sir.
Sure. Thank you so much.
So in that case, without...
You're more than welcome to start right away. I'm ready.
Great. So in that case, I would straightaway request President to kindly open the session. Mr. Sureka.
Thank you, Rajiv. Good evening, sir. Warm welcome to Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, to the ICC annual session. Sir, we are grateful to you for taking out your time from your busy schedule. Globally, it may not be the best of times. With OECD Interim Economic Outlook released in September 2022, warning of pervasive economic slowdown, mostly as the fallout of the Russian-Ukraine military conflict, rising inflation, and tightening of financial conditions. In this backdrop, the real GDP growth projection for India are projected at 6.9% for 2022 and 5.7% for 2023. Comparable figures for China and the world are 3.2 and 3% respectively for the year 2022. For 2023, China is estimated to grow at 4.7%, while the world growth is likely to decelerate to 2.2%. So India seems to be at a sweet spot, sir, in a not so easy global situation. And experts feel India's economic resilience comes from its ability to rely on domestic resource mobilization, trade, and economic policies. Its economic size, resilience of Indian stock markets, and macroeconomics management by the government and the central bank are laudable, sir. However, India does have its share of global and local challenges like energy prices, inflation, unemployment, and a low per capita income. Admittedly, we have come a long way in the last 75 years. We are already the 5th largest economy in the world and aspire to become the 3rd in the few years. We are at the cusp of becoming the manufacturing hub of the world. Sir, as the part of the country's think tank, we would like to get enlightened by you that how India is going to go forward, facing the global crises, the global challenges, and how quickly can we become the 3rd largest economy, and how do we plan our 2047 to create a world-class infrastructure, a world-class ease of doing business so that we can attract more and more investments into our country. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So just 1 second. I'll just close some of my windows so that I get full computing power to focus on the presentation and not get technical outages. Thank you for those kind words of introduction, and it is my pleasure to be able to share my thoughts with you, the distinguished members of the Indian Chamber of Commerce. And I noticed that more than 150 people have signed on to this event, and I hope we can collectively make sense of the global and the Indian economic situation. Luckily for us, the Indian economic situation looks better, far better, in fact, than what it is for the rest of the world. Maybe if I may request those who are not speaking to mute their lines, I think we will be able to reduce the ambient noise. I'm just sharing the screen here. I hope you're able to see the full screen.
Yes, please.
Steering the Indian economy through global and local challenges, that is a title that I've been asked to speak on. First of all, in the last few weeks or so, many people, Larry Summers and Professor Adam Tooze at the Columbia University, have popularized this term, polycrisis. Polycrisis means multiple crises simultaneously entangled with each other. So one is scarring from the pandemic. Scarring means simply the after effects of the pandemic, primarily in terms of lost education for children, both primary, secondary, and also even higher education institutions, and the implications it will have down the road for educational attainments, skills in the job market, etc. And countries, in order to support their population when economy was shut down, took on a lot of debt. So how do countries deal with this debt burden? Some countries can afford to print their way and pay off. Maybe developed countries will be able to do that, but many low-income countries, as we are experiencing in the case of Sri Lanka, many low-income countries, and Sri Lanka was a middle-income country before the pandemic, are struggling. Then, of course, we have very high inflation rates. And if you look at the forecast in the developed world, they all think very smoothly next year, the inflation rates will come down towards the usual levels of 2% or below. But historically, it has not been the case. So what will they do? What will the world do if inflation persists in 2023 as well? And then there is the issue of availability, not just high prices, the issue of availability of commodities like food, fertilizer, petroleum products. And then we are also dealing with the fact that many countries are trying to raise interest rates at the same time. Although I must say, in the last 2 weeks or so, Australia, Canada, and the European Central Bank have kind of said they will not be so aggressive. Only the Federal Reserve is signaling aggressive language. So maybe synchronized monetary tightening is becoming a little less synchronized. That's a small relief for the developing countries. And of course, along with the tightening of interest rates, higher interest rates, come the prospect of recession, capital leaving emerging economies. Even Indian stock markets in 2022 second half and 2021 second half and 22 first half experienced capital outflows from the Indian stock market. We didn't see the reaction in the stock market because Indian investors came into the stock market in a big way. But there is capital leaving the country in the last 12 months until June 2022, especially on the portfolio investment side. And then Russia-Ukraine war is just one beginning of various geopolitical conflicts. There is Greece and Turkey, there is North Korea there, and there is Iran with its nuclear ambitions. And then there is China, which did not rule out the use of force when it comes to Taiwan. And so there are multiple conflicts here. Some of it is militaristic, some of it is technological, and some of it is economic, and some of it is all three put together. China's economic slowdown, and even yesterday, they reiterated their zero COVID strategy. So what does China's slowdown mean for the global supply chains dependent on China's production? Apple today said iPhone 14 will be disrupted because of China's insistence on zero COVID plans. Now, the flip side is if China reopens next year, that will still have problems for the world because then inflation can again come back because China will consume more crude oil, more food products, more steel, more cement, etc. So in that sense, which one is better for the world? A China slowdown or a China coming back on stream in the normal course of life? So all these issues are, in fact, we must say, beyond the analytical capabilities of human beings because they all are coming at the same time. And we have not faced such a situation in a very, very long time, since the end of World War II. So in recent years, yes, of course, we have faced one element or the other. We had a technology bust. We had a 9/11 in 2001. And then we had the global financial crisis. But politics was not an issue. Geopolitics was not an issue. Commodity prices, only energy was an issue. Food prices were not an issue at that time. Then 2015, European Union crisis. Okay, Greece, Portugal, Italy, etc. had some debt problems to deal with, but ECB was able to handle that. And then, so what we are facing right now is a multi-pronged, multiple crisis at all levels. And so whatever we are saying at the moment is based on the assumption that these crises do not become worse. So even as we talk about the Indian economy, we have to understand the period of uncertainty. And here we have to distinguish between risk and uncertainty. Risk is known unknowns. Uncertainty is unknown unknowns. So we have actually now a lot of unknown unknowns. So prolonged with potential and significantly large adverse impact on economic well-being, significant degradation of human capacity and coordination at a global level to respond to the collective goal. I would say basically this poly-crisis is marked by a sense of disorientation on the part of individuals or even policymakers in many countries. And as he said, lack of experience. We have not experienced this before. Therefore, possibilities of fiscal, financial, and geopolitical accidents are many. As far as India is concerned, basically, if you look at where we are in 22-23, compared to what we expected at the beginning of the year, yes, we are going to have low growth, 6.5% to 7%. But this compared to many other countries in the world, this is a very, very good number. Only Saudi Arabia is going to grow at a rate faster than this 6.5% to 7% for India. Inflation is high, but it is not high compared to other countries. Other countries have a target of 2%, but they have an inflation rate of 8 to 10%. We have a target of 4%, but we have about 7.4% inflation rate now. So the gap between the target and the reality is much lower for India than it is for advanced countries. Employment is recovering in the formal sector. As far as the informal sector is concerned, we don't even have good quality data. But there are signs that rural consumption is beginning to pick up. Two-wheeler sales is one example. Capital investment from the private sector, new capacities, it is showing some signs of picking up. Unfortunately for us, the pandemic, commodity price increase, interest rates going up in India and elsewhere is pushing out the capacity, the capital's expenditure, capex cycle from arriving with full force. It is getting delayed, but it is on track. Balance sheets is a very, very important strong point of India. Balance sheets of banks, non-banks, corporates, companies, because last decade was a big decade of balance sheet repair. Now the balance sheets are repaired, and that's a good sign. The important worry for us is the trade deficit. India has a trade deficit because we import a lot of crude oil. 85% of crude oil comes from imported sources. And also we continue to import even consumption goods. Partly also we have also imposed export duties and export restrictions on food grain, sugar, steel, iron ore, etc. That is also holding back our export revenues. So in that sense, financing the trade deficit is an important challenge for this year. But capital flows, even though I would say foreign portfolio flows were negative, until June, they are stabilizing and foreign direct investment flows are quite strong. The exchange rate, rupee has depreciated against the US dollar, but US dollar has strengthened against many countries in the world. And rupee depreciation is in line with the fact that US interest rates are going up. The gap between US and Indian interest rates are coming down. Therefore, US dollar is becoming attractive for many dollar-based investors. So they would naturally try to take profits or repatriate their capital back to their home currency. That is why normally when US interest rates go up, dollar indeed strengthens. And that is what we are witnessing now. But while these challenges are there, but on balance, India has more green and amber than red in the current situation. Overall, it is still a relatively remarkably stable situation. But what about the progress we have achieved in the last 8 years? The economy has indeed become the global 5th largest economy. Of course, we know that we have a lot to catch up with on per capita terms. India's share of global GDP has gone up to 3.4%. But more importantly, in many areas, global automobile production, steel production, mobile phone, India has become world's within the top 5 largest producers. And if you look at the performance on global innovation, governance index, ease of doing business, we have some distance to cover, but we have covered a long distance also. What did we do right that India looks relatively better? In the immediate past, we did a few things right. One is we did not overstimulate the economy. We did not push too much of money into the system, either government relief or RBI relief. It was measured and gradual and targeted. And then vaccinating 140 crore people, maybe excluding children, 200 crore doses have been administered and rising. And then micro, small, and medium enterprises were given targeted support in terms of credit guarantee. CIBIL has a report from August 2022 showing how this scheme benefited especially micro enterprises. Without this, the financial stress in micro enterprises would have been much larger. And then the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Yojana social welfare schemes ensured absence of famine, basic health insurance and health coverage, and also prevented many rural and poor urban households from taking loans because government took care of the basic needs of food grains and also health insurance, etc. Going a little further back, we all know that there is still a lot of work to be done with respect to GST. Everybody talks about GST 2.0, bringing property, petroleum products, alcohol, etc. into GST fold. But the truth is GST has come a long way already. Human memories are short. Before 2017, we know we had 490 taxes. Moving goods from one state to another, or even from one municipality, from one octroi checkpost to another, was a problem, logistically, legally, and also physically. Now we have forgotten, and the benchmark has gone up, and our expectations have gone up. That's the thing. The human mind is such that whenever one particular goal is met, it shifts the goalpost higher, and when the expectations get revised, we can never be satisfied. But we have to also appreciate the fact that compared to where we were, we have come a long way. Same thing with insolvency and bankruptcy code. Bad investment decisions or bad fortune should be possible to reverse or restart with a clean slate. How do we do that? You need to give options for people to declare insolvency, settle debt, because after all, a debt is not a mistake just made by the borrowers. It's also a question of bad judgment on the part of lenders. So both sides have to come to the table, arrive at some sacrifices and move on. And that is what insolvency and bankruptcy is all about. Privatization. Of course, the government of India has privatized many companies lately. So the more important thing is, after nearly 20 years, privatization has come back to the lexicon. Privatization has come back into the policy framework. We may not have a lot of privatization to show for it, but the important thing is privatization has re-entered the lexicon of policymakers. And I will probably mention this a bit more later. We got the banking system repaired. That is one of the most important big things we did in the last 5 to 6 years. And income taxes have been rationalized, especially for businesses. There is 2 options, with exemptions, without exemptions. Of course, direct tax reform have to happen, but a lot has happened on indirect taxes like GST, etc. And there is continuing improvement to tax administration. Once again, of course, we are still having lots of issues with tax administration because our benchmark expectations also keep moving higher. So amidst all of this, we also kept up government investment in infrastructure because private sector and the financial sector were repairing balance sheets last decade. Somebody has to run with the baton of economic growth. And that is what was done by the government. So union government increased its capital expenditure, public investment in infrastructure, 2.8x from 2015-16 to 2022-23 this year. Half the year is gone, and the government is on track to spend 7.5 lakh crores on capital expenditure. And that we are seeing in the improved road network, connectivity to smaller cities through airports, and also Sagarmala scheme, etc. Clearly, India's physical infrastructure is showing discernible improvement thanks to the government making up for the absence of private investment picking up in the economy in the last 5 to 6 years. And this is what I keep telling people. What is going to keep us in good stead? What is going to enable us to grow at a very, at least a moderate rate of 6.5% to 7% this decade is the fact that our corporate sector, our non-financial sector, including households and government and all kinds of businesses, they trimmed their balance sheet, reduced debt. Non-financial sector debt to GDP ratio came down from 112% down to 85%, nearly 27, 28 percentage points. Same thing with the corporate sector. Credit to the corporate sector came down from 75% of GDP by 2012 down to below 50% of GDP, another 26, 27 percentage point reduction. Balance sheets were trimmed. So we are actually having trimmer balance sheets. If we are having bloated balance sheets, I would be concerned. Of course, you might think of 1 or 2 exceptions to this. We are talking about the aggregate here, okay? And because of the balance sheet repair, non-performing loans as a percentage of overall loans and advances have come down. On the left side chart, you can see that. On the right side, you can see banking system is recapitalized and is ready to lend. And it is lending, by the way. Before I talk about the banking credit, I must also tell you the other important thing that is going to support our growth. So one is better balance sheets in the banking system, better balance sheets in the corporate sector. And the second powerful, strong pillar of growth for India is the public digital infrastructure, PDI. It is not just about the UPI or the fast retail payments. You see the growth there. 2,574 times in terms of transactions, 1,211 times in terms of value of transactions. But more than that, it is not about just Aadhaar or payment system or connectivity. All of them are important, but they are the founding pillars. On top of these pillars, connectivity, payments, and identity, we have CoWIN, which can become a health app in general, not just for vaccination. Ayushman Bharat, health insurance. Diksha, which is to make up for the lost years of learning from the pandemic. FASTag, which is going to enable movement through the highway, national highway system. Open network digital commerce, which is going to enable micro and small enterprises to access the global markets through digital platforms, interoperable digital platforms. One enterprise listed on one platform will be visible to everybody on every other platform. The GST network and income taxes, traces. So all these together constitute the India stack. And there is much interest from developed world to see what India has done. Because in developed world, particularly the United States, the digital infrastructure, unfortunately, is in private hands totally. And that is creating a lot of anomalies, even curtailment of freedom of choice for consumers and households. India has found the right balance between public sector and private sector when it comes to the digital infrastructure. So there is much interest in India's model. So between balance sheet repair and digital infrastructure, I would say the medium-term growth is looking good at between 6.5% and 7%. More recently, closer at home now, 22-23, how are we doing? And there, I think the recovery from the pandemic is continuing in spite of the commodity price shock this year, in spite of higher interest rates. If you look at the import of capital goods, production of capital goods in the country, index of industrial production, in the bottom, you see steel consumption, cement production, in all these 4 charts, the blue line is running well above the previous 3 years. So this year, the momentum of manufacturing activity is strong. In the Purchasing Managers Index, S&P Global, the Economics Associate Director said, manufacturers continue to loosen their purse strings, willing to spend. They marked a rise in input purchases, expansion of capacities, and more importantly, there is resilience in the manufacturing sector. The key for me is expansion of capacities to accommodate improving sales. The future output index indicates robust business optimism towards the 1 year ahead outlook. And then if you see more high frequency indicators, RBI puts this out. The industrial sector in general is moving from red to amber to green. Most activities have recovered and well above the pandemic levels. Services sector, same situation, excepting domestic air cargo, international air cargo, and free traffic, you have every other sectors in total green, which means we have recovered completely from the pandemic. Okay, so normalization, recovery of activity. And bank credit growth is rising in a very big way. Bank credit growth is running at 17%, okay? And credit growth to micro, small, and medium enterprises is running at about 30% or even 42% in terms of MSME credit. That's very, very heartening, okay? It is not just enough for bank credit to grow and supporting only consumption loans, but even MSME loans are going up. That's a good sign because Indian banks looks like are willing to lend partly because of credit guarantee and also partly because their own risk models are getting better. They're able to lend on the basis of cash flows. How is the employment situation doing? Again, as I said, we do have imperfect data because we can't measure rural employment that well. We only do it once a year. But if you look at the Provident Fund enrollment on a net basis, the blue line tells you this year it's running well above what was the case in the previous 3 years. If you look at the Indian rupee, of course, newspapers will tell you rupee historic low, etc., etc. But they look at only dollar rupee exchange rate. But the truth is we have to look at the overall movement of the Indian rupee against all currencies. And if you look at it, India is just barely moved on the right side against all currencies based on our trade patterns with those countries, Europe, UK, China, Asia, USA, our exchange rate has barely moved. Even if you look at the dollar exchange rate, again, we are not at the worst. We are, in fact, among the top 5 from the bottom. Okay, so if you look at Russia, Mexico, Indonesia, India are the best performing countries against the US dollar. And if you look at the confidence of investors in India, the blue line tells you how much foreign direct investment is flowing into India minus how much is flowing out of India by Indians investing overseas. The net FDI flow has been rising steadily over the last 20 years. On the bars are portfolio, capital flows into capital markets, stock markets, bond markets, etc. Yes, that is showing some occasional negative numbers, but even then, the negative numbers are much smaller in height compared to the inflows. If you look at the data from July onwards, the outflows have become stable. July, August, in fact, positive inflows into India on a net basis. September, October, very modest outflows. November, in the first 6 days, very positive inflows. The PLI is actually a new scheme announced during the pandemic. So what I want to sort of, before I go into PLI, what I want to tell you is, I shared with you my perception of why the medium-term outlook is good. That's because of balance sheet strength. That's because of corporates willing to invest, manufacturing activity continuing to expand, and the digital infrastructure becoming more and more important in improving access to finance and formalization. Then the second part, I'm showing you why the current growth situation momentum is good as well. And the PLI is also for the medium term and for the very long term. It is about creating capacity within India to become a global leader, to attract supply chains into India, to facilitate China +1 from happening. All these are the goals of PLI. And yes, the PLI schemes were announced in 2020 and 21, but there is going to be more expansion and more likely to grow momentum. Right now, it is happening in 2 or 3 areas: mobile phones, pharmaceuticals, as well as chemicals, but it has to pick up steam in other areas as well. And hopefully in the next 2 years, it will happen. Challenges in the Northeastern states, yes. Northeastern states in general, until now, have suffered from low capacity, low connectivity, etc. But important that all regions will not necessarily participate in all aspects of economy. They have to play to their strengths. So in past, challenges are there is very little revenue generation capacity, higher committed liabilities, there is infrastructure deficit. But the important thing is in the last 6 or 7 years, this infrastructure deficit is being addressed. If the strength of the Northeastern economy is its nature, its natural resources, it's the talent and the education and the skill levels of the people, okay? And if it is about agricultural production, Northeast may not have strength in manufacturing, but it can do quite well in agriculture and services. And the kind of resources, hydrological resources it has, it can become a leader in hydropower generation, etc. So Northeast should play to its strengths. And one of the areas Northeast can expand with better mobile connectivity and data is because today, work from home is possible across the world. Work from home should become work from India, and work from India can become work from Northeast because of the ability of the Northeast people to have proficiency in English language and their much higher levels of literacy. So Northeastern region must play to its strengths and focus on services, agricultural products, as well as in tourism. These are the important areas for the Northeastern sector to focus on. And the reason government support is the creation of a dedicated ministry for development of Northeastern region, setting up the Northeastern Development Finance Corporation, and basically an outlay of 6,600 crores for the remaining 4 years of the 15th Finance Commission. Funding infrastructure, social development, livelihood activities, and also missing development gaps being filled in various sectors. So what are the suggestions we can make for Northeastern development? Timely constitution of the State Finance Commission to devolve power to local governments. Debt consolidation, public finances must improve. Comprehensive performance evaluation of state enterprises. Digitization of tax administration. Capitalizing on indigenous resource mobilization. Hydropower, as I mentioned. Tapping the potential for agro-climatic zone for better exports. And as I mentioned, more importantly, the people of the Northeast is its biggest strength. Services sector, working from India, working from Northeast because of literacy and English language proficiency should be the way to go. Moving back to the longer term national level issues, India still has lots of challenges to face. Public sector has a lot of inefficient, unproductive assets. The national monetization pipeline is one way to monetize inefficient, unproductive assets and capitalize them to reduce our debt stock. Once our interest payments come down, more resources get released for development expenditure. Single window system for businesses. Logistics policy in order to ensure that our exports remain competitive. Because India's logistics costs are higher by about twice the global average. Labor laws become simpler. It will become easier to hire. Simplification of labor laws is not about firing people, it's about hiring people. Along with labor law simplification, we have to Apprenticeship Act should enable crores of young Indians to be taken on apprenticeship training for on-the-job training. skill development. There is huge potential for the apprenticeship sector to contribute to India's bridging the skill gap and providing employment as well. New public sector enterprise policy will ensure that the government exits non-core sectors and maintains a minimal presence in the core sectors. GIFT City is to imagine the future of finance in India and to provide for India's infrastructure funding needs in the next 25 years. And of course, states also have to get their capacity to undertake capital expenditure, improve state finances, and put their electricity, power generation, and power distribution sectors in order. India cannot become a manufacturing powerhouse until it can provide affordable and uninterrupted high-quality power to our productive enterprises. Strategies to mitigate the risks. We should, in the short run, allow the rupee to depreciate gradually, and we should use foreign exchange reserves judiciously, keeping the firepower for 2023 as well. We have to invest in supply chain resilience. The world economy has too many unknown unknowns. That is why we are doing free trade agreements, import diversification, seeking more different suppliers for crude oil, passing on the international prices to end users. Yes, we cannot take everything onto the fisc. Then interest costs will go up, and that will basically mean more difficulties for businesses if cost of capital rises. We should augment foreign exchange reserves just to keep ourselves well prepared for any contingencies in 2023 because the global environment is very risky at the moment. Domestically, what we should do, maintain macroeconomic stability. Stability is a precious asset right now. Rather than somehow trying to grow in a difficult environment. Growth will happen because we have done a lot of hard work already. So we need to allow the hard work to deliver fruits in terms of growth, while current policy efforts should be focused on stability. Direct tax reforms must continue. GST 2.0, completing ongoing capex projects in the government. And in any case, credit growth is addressing recovery, bank credit growth. So, but therefore, bank deposits have to come back, and we should continue to address the challenges faced by MSMEs because in terms of delayed payments, access to finance, etc. What about the long term, Amrit Kaal until India 2047? We should set our sights very high, becoming the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, self-reliance for energy, tapping new age financial technologies, registration, insurance, and supply chain technologies. And I spoke about the importance of GIFT City to provide financing for India's infrastructure needs for the next 25 years and evangelize India's digital infrastructure and become a global leader, soft power in digitalization, and continue to ensure that India's fiscal policy does not become a drag on the private sector. Because the best contribution fiscal policy can make is to lower the benchmark cost of capital. Government's borrowing cost, if it comes down, private sector borrowing costs will come down. And also continue to work on improving capacity of the government, states, union and state governments to undertake capital expenditure and to provide governance. So that is the vision for 2047. So ladies and gentlemen, we are on a good wicket compared to others. But the challenges the world faces, including us, are extraordinary, unprecedented since the end of World War II. So we should be prepared for unexpected events, unknown unknowns. But even then, if we continue to stay on the track of what we have been doing in the last 8 years and in the last 3 years, use our resources judiciously, allow the effects of all the good things we have done to pay dividends and not commit new mistakes and not be adventuristic in our policies, focus on stability, then I think not only this decade, but the next 25 years will see India making unprecedented progress in economically and socially as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your very, very enlightening address. With your permission, we would like to take few questions. Mr. Sureka, would you like to kickstart? If you could unmute, please.
Well, you mentioned about capital flowing into the government exchequer, and for that it is important to monetize some of the public sector units, and we have achieved a few. But how can we speeden up this process? I think it is a very important area where we can unlock, the government can unlock a lot of the government assets.
Unlocking what?
The privatization of many companies, sir.
Basically, disinvestment.
Disinvestment.
Yeah, yeah.
How can we speeden up this process?
Yeah. I mean, this investment is a priority area for the government. As I said, the biggest achievement was in bringing back privatization into the agenda, policy agenda itself. But there are many stakeholders who still feel very uncomfortable with the idea of privatization. So even after 20 years since the first privatization was done very well in the government of Prime Minister Vajpayee, there are still very considerable pockets of resistance. They need to be overcome. So this investment should not be about mobilizing revenues for the government, but actually about unlocking public sector the enterprise efficiency. So the government remains committed, but we have to wait for the actual privatization, because ultimately putting the enterprises on the block is the function of various ministries as well. And it is applicable both in the union and state government. So we need all stakeholders to get committed to the idea of privatization and letting go. And it is a work in progress. It will remain a work in progress for some more time. I have some questions here in the chat window as well. I mean, sure. So one is a statement, we are paying Russia for imports. I don't fully understand. Yes, we have to pay for imports from anybody if you are importing from anybody. I'm not sure. There is a question there. And there is another question. What is the reason for the decline in the business innovation? It is not a decline. The ranking has improved. So actually, it is not a decline, it's an improvement. What is the government doing to increase tax base? In fact, that answer must be given by you people, because all of us have to contribute to the improvement and widening of the tax base. It is not a responsibility of the government. It is a responsibility of the citizens and the enterprises of the country. And the government indeed is doing enough by leveraging information, by making the tax administration system simpler, and by formalizing the economy. That is how more people are coming into the tax bracket. But I would say the onus is as much on us, if not greater, than it is on the government. I'm not very sure I understand the first question about balancing inflation with respect to food grains, sustainable economy, finally, organize the unorganized wings. Yes, the Udyam portal for MSMEs, the eShram portal for registering informal workers, and the entire digital infrastructure is indeed formalizing many parts of the Indian economy that have remained unorganized and informal. If you look at the number of enterprises that Flipkart, Amazon, and Google are onboarding, the progress is exponential. So many enterprises are now coming on commercial organized platform, which means they're getting formalized. In fact, if you look at the Udyam portal data, you can see many micro enterprises have actually grown to become small, and many small enterprises have grown to become medium. And I wrote about it in my column in Mint last week. So the formalization of the Indian economy is actually proceeding much faster than we would expect to be, partly because of the cumulative effects of the last 6 years of digitization, facilitated by first the creation of a unique national identity, bank accounts, GST, and as well as insolvency and bankruptcy code, and creating the entire digital infrastructure, which is allowing many people to actually register themselves in the formal networks so that they can enjoy access to finance, etc. So formalization of India is proceeding much better than we would have expected. We have telecom is the backbone of digital. I have to sign off in the next 2 minutes, please, if you don't mind. Why is the government not reducing the spectrum fee? I'm sorry, it is not a question for the Chief Economic Advisor, so I don't intend to answer that question. And then if I look at...
Sir, there are two more questions. If you agree, we can just take them too.
Let me first take on the questions in the chat window, then you can tell me the oral questions.
Sure, please.
I'm a researcher on MSMEs. Enlighten how MSMEs should move. Should we suggest the MSMEs for ease so that economy can move? Again, that's a separate discussion, and there is not a silver bullet here. Sometimes we have to understand that we may be possible to see the effects of our actions immediately. Many other things have to fall into place. What is it that each one of us can do, either in the government or in the private sector, is to do what is in our remit. So from the government's point of view in Northeast, reducing compliance costs, simplifying laws, investing in playing to your strengths, and also devolving power to local governments, getting the power generations and power distribution in order. All these are the things, and also making the economy and the region resilient to climate shocks, frequent flooding, etc. These are all the ways in which Northeast can make itself attractive to businesses, small or medium or big. Then the impact will automatically follow over time. So without worrying about the outcomes, we just need to focus on the things that we need to do at the policy level. Things will begin to happen when other factors also converge. What about reducing the tax rate and offer more liberal tax rate? I think the person who wanted India's tax base to be widened should answer this question about reducing the tax rate and offering more liberal tax rates. That is not the way to go for a country with a per capita income of 2.5 lakhs. We actually, the minimal tax slab base starts at 5 lakhs of rupees. In no other country, in developed countries, is the first lowest tax bracket is always well below the per capita income. India is one of the very few countries in the world where the first lowest tax slab is much above the per capita income. How can we reverse the falling participation of women in the workforce and unleash another wave of economic growth? I would simply request you to read the article that I co-wrote with a colleague of mine 2 weeks ago, whether India's women labor force participation rate is actually falling or not. It is not. You would be surprised. Please read that article. Do you see India meeting its fiscal deficit target for FY23 despite the shortfall expected in disinvestment receipts? At the moment, our expectation is that the fiscal deficit target will be met. So I think I have answered many of the questions here. Okay. Are there any other questions? I can take a couple of more questions before I have to sign off, please.
Sure. Mr. Goenka?
Sir, I chair the Agriculture Committee for the Indian Chamber of Commerce. With 60% of our population engaged in agriculture, we find the contribution to GDP is just 16%. And the entire progress, especially after the farm bills and its outcome, has really become very slow in policy advocacy, in policy transformation and taking bold steps. How do we think we can unleash the power of agriculture and 60% of India's population in exponentially expanding our GDP and progressing as a developed nation?
So actually, India's farming sector reforms are happening outside the food grains area. Actually, it's more with respect to rice and wheat, and our policies with respect to rice and wheat that need more streamlining. But whether it is in in dairy, or whether it is in poultry or fisheries, in many other areas, market forces are already very much operating freely. Yes, we need to find employment for many of the people currently engaged in agriculture, but we should remember that agricultural workforce share has been declining as well. But if we if we manage to address some of the underlying issues regarding pricing of power, and therefore the over-exploitation of water tables, etc., in selective states in India, and allow for crop diversification and focus on production of sturdy crops, coarse food grains, etc., and edible oil. So I agree that many of these things still are work in progress or need to be addressed, but we must remember that the agricultural sector, in indeed several areas other than the staple food grains, there has been much progress. But agriculture, as you know very well, is as much a subject for states as it is for the union government. Therefore, it has to be a collaborative effort.
Mr. Jalan?
Very insightful, sir. Would capital inflows be a perceived risk for you? I know it is muted over the last few months, but would the government of India even consider restrictions on capital outflows as we go along? I know there were some restrictions about a decade back or so. Could they come back?
No, I don't think it is on the cards. And at the moment, yes, we recognize that it's an important issue to consider, but we do have adequate foreign exchange reserves at the moment to deal with.
Thank you.
So with your permission, I must seek your forgiveness. I do have to sign off. And thank you very much for the active interest. And thank you for the engagement. Hopefully next time we can meet in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Sir.
Thank you so much, sir. So,
sorry, Mr. Raje, we couldn't take your...
I know. I realized because I wanted to ask, everyone talked about MSME, the role of MSME in $10 trillion economy. So I wanted to really find out, how they see our survival and progress.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are the short-term measures that can be taken to ensure that MSME becomes more robust?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a very valid question. But anyway, I think he has done an excellent presentation overall.
True.
Limited time. So I think very positive outlook, definitely.